with the CFP rankings being unveiled yesterday, I'm going to go over the 7 most important remaining college football games for the rest of the season. We're going to order these in terms of importance, not only for their conference championship race, but for the CFP playoffs in general. We're going to start off with a group of 5 kind of matchup here. Notre Dame is taking on Army. This is in a couple weeks. I do believe Army will be undefeated going into this game, while Notre Dame will probably win the next 2 to go 9-1 into this. The reason this game is important is because not only will it affect Notre Dame's seeding going into the CFP playoff, it could affect the group of 5 seeding as Army, if they could win over Notre Dame, no doubt would have the best win of any group of 5 team, and they would be undefeated if they were to win the American Championship game, and they would have a better win over Boise State, who would only have 1 loss in the Mountain West, and they would have a much better win. Army's best win would have been over Notre Dame, or Boise State's best win would have been over UNLV, most likely in their conference championship game. So I think Army, undefeated no less, would get the nod over that. On the flip side, Notre Dame has already beaten a decent team in Navy. If they would beat a 1-loss, I guess they would finish with 1-loss Army team. That would also be a good win for them, not to mention the end of the season against Southern Cal. So either team, it boosters their resume and gets them that one step further into the playoff. We'll just have to see what happens. I do believe Notre Dame in the end will win this one, but you never know what could happen. Army stats going into this are much better than they have been in the years past. Georgia versus Ole Miss. This is happening this week. The significance of this basically is whoever loses this, I think will be out of the SEC championship race. Not technically for Georgia, but more so for Ole Miss. This is their chance to shine. I think Georgia's going to win this game. If they were to win, they obviously would move on to face Tennessee in a couple weeks in one of the bigger games of the year. And then they would hold the tiebreaker with Texas if it were to come down to those 2 teams. But on the flip side, if Ole Miss were to win this, they are right back in the thick of the SEC championship race. They would have 2 losses in conference, but they would hold the tie-breaking edge with Georgia head-to-head because they would also have 2 losses. So they would have an outside chance of getting to the SEC championship game. And sitting at 16 there for Ole Miss, Georgia's number 2. I do believe that Ole Miss would be right back in the driver's seat to get in the playoff as an at-large bid. Next up is Texas and Texas A&M. Both teams, last week, this would have been a much bigger game had Texas A&M not lost to South Carolina on the road. They would only have 1 loss, no losses in conference. Texas will have that 1 loss to Georgia. Going into this, I think Texas A&M neither team will lose a game. Texas will win the next 3, while A&M will win the next 2. Texas, I think, will win this. This will basically eliminate Texas A&M from playoff contention because not only would they not be in contention for the SEC, but I don't think their strength of schedule would be as tough as the rest of these other teams. So 3-loss, weaker schedule A&M team would not be enough. But if they were to beat Texas, I think that would basically kick them out of the SEC championship race, give or take what happens with the rest of the conference in these other games, and would get A&M an outside chance with only 1 loss to get in that conference championship and get in even as a 3-loss non-conference champion winner into the CFP. Next up would be the game that's happening this week as well. This one is pretty simple. Both teams sit at 6-2. Alabama has 2 conference losses. LSU only has 1 conference loss, but they also have a bad non-conference loss to a sub-500 USC team right now. So this one is simple. The loser is out of the SEC championship race. The loser is also out of the CFP playoff race because 3 losses would doom either team in. As you see below, the stats, Alabama has the edge of just about every single major category, scoring, yards per play, and defense-wise. I think Alabama will win this, but I do believe that this will be a lot closer. Not a lot closer, but I think it'll be a much more competitive game than much of the analytics show. But both teams will, this will be a good game, and can't wait to see what happens at the end. The loser will basically be eliminated from playoffs. The Big 12 race basically come down to last week against Iowa State and Kansas State. This could be theoretically a rematch 2 weeks in a row if Kansas State were to beat Iowa State and whatever happens with BYU. The odds of that happening are pretty low, though. But so the more odds-on favorite for this game would be the winner of this game advances to the Big 12 championship game and therefore had a chance to get that top 4 bye. With the Big 12 being so low in the rankings, I do believe that even with a undefeated BYU and a 1-loss Iowa State team, they still would only get 1 team in the playoffs going into the last week of the season. So Let's see what happens with this game. The loser is basically eliminated from the Big 12 and also the CFP contention as well. Now, the next game is one of the biggest matchups in the history of Indiana football. Indiana's never been 9-0 in the history of their program. They've been around since the 1890s, and this is the first time they ever started the season 9-0. I think they're going to win this week. I think Ohio State, then they get a bye. I think Ohio State wins the next two, gets a 7-1 or a 9-1 going into this game. This will be basically for all the marbles and who goes to the Big Ten championship game and who is basically left out, because Ohio State wins, they would only have one loss to Oregon, and they hold the tiebreaker with Indiana. Most likely will beat Michigan last week of the season at home, so then they would get the nod in the Big Ten championship game. On the other side, the flip side, Indiana would be undefeated. They'd be 11-0. They would hold the tiebreaker with Ohio State, who would have two losses, and therefore they would now be behind Oregon, Indiana, and Penn State, even though Penn State would only have one conference loss. So this is pretty big, and I do believe that if Ohio State were to lose this game, they would be playing for their playoff lives against Michigan, even getting a 9-2 there. And Indiana, on the other hand, would basically be a lock if they were to beat Ohio State, be a lock for the at-large bid of the CFP, regardless of what happens with the Big Ten championship race. And finally, I think the most important remaining game we have of the year, Georgia taking on Tennessee here in 2 weeks. Now, Georgia, like I said, I do believe they will beat Ole Miss this week, and Tennessee, I do think they take care of business. This game will basically be for whoever wins will probably get to the SEC championship game, because the winner would only have one loss. And I think even though Tennessee and Texas have not played, they would own the tiebreaker with Texas because they would have played a like team, and they would be the highest rated team in the SEC, Georgia. And Georgia would have they would have beaten Georgia. Texas would have lost to Georgia. So I do believe Tennessee would get the nod. But Texas might still get in. We'll have to see what their win-loss record is. But this is by far the most important game, not only for the SEC, but for the CFP, because the loser is in a much more difficult position to get an at-large bid than the winner is, obviously. And I think the winner would be basically a lock, no matter what they do the rest of the season, to get into the CFP after this. So this game is probably the most important the rest of the season, and has the most implications for the SEC and the CFP championship